In this video, I'll teach you how you can run a focused campaign to reliably grow demand for your services. I'm going to share one client story to bring everything to life. In this particular client story, the client actually had to stop using the strategy at one point because they had brought in so much good work that they didn't want to win more work until they build up their resources. Hi, I'm Mo Bunnell, and in the past 20 years, I and my teams have helped over 60,000 professionals with boutique elite firms to their first $50 or $100 million, all the way up to multinational, multi-billion-dollar organizations. Now, there's an old saw in marketing, and it goes like this. We know exactly half of our marketing works. The problem is we don't know which half. Well, the reason that gets a chuckle is because everybody relates to it. You're having random acts of a lunch. You're going to a conference. You're not really sure if it works or not. You can take your efforts from random to reliable by using the techniques that I'm going to share here. So let's get into a stepwise process that you can put into action. Just think 1, 2, 3. Step 1 is knowing the audience that you're for. If direct, these are people that can hire you. If indirect, these are people that can provide referrals. Step 2, invest in their success, earn the right to get to know them, effectively buy time with them, and start the relationship. The third step, distribution. How are you going to get that in front of them? And there's a lot of different ways to do it, sometimes using third parties, sometimes using your own content that you develop yourself. But when you think of this 3-step process, you're going to be able to measure your success as you go through a campaign, and that is what's going to turn business development from random to reliable. All right, let's start with the first step. This particular client was a tax controversy attorney, and he mostly focused on high net worth individuals. So that means he's not a direct type, he's an indirect type because he doesn't know which high net worth individual is going to get a letter from the IRS. But rather, he could focus on referral sources, which were accountants, but not just any old accountant. Those that are at the big 4 accounting firms tend to handle this kind of thing in-house, so they're not as good. People at too small of accounting firms generally don't have high net worth individuals that are clientele, so they don't really work very well. So we really focused on the 5th largest accounting firm to the 30th biggest accounting firm in the United States, and from there, we felt like the perfect referral source for him. The particular person was an office managing partner, or OMP, of a particular office. What we did was we developed a list of individuals, human being names, Jane Smith, Joseph Jones, the office managing partners of that exact size of accounting firms. And with that, we've got a list and we're off to the races. Okay, now let's move on to step 2. How are we going to get their attention? What people usually do is reach out, talk about themselves, yell their credentials to the other side and say, call me if you need me. That does not work. The better way to get somebody's attention is with an investment in their success. So back to our tax controversy attorney. What he did is he created some content that he thought office managing partners of these particular size of accounting firms would love. And we even tried to make it really attention grabbing. The 7 things that you should not do if you get a letter from the IRS, which obviously it flips to what you should do at the end, which is call him. He was able to package that up in a way that it was so valuable that he could not only send it to those OMPs on the list, he offered to give a lunch and learn or some type of virtual session on the topic so that he could get in front of not just the OMP, but as many partners that were available at that time. You think with empathy from their perspective, what could I provide? Create something that has massive value, that leverages my expertise so that I can get their attention. Adding value versus selling. And when we do that, then we can move to step 3, distribution. What you want to do at this stage is not just email people and offer them the lunch and learn, or whatever your asset is, whatever your investment is. How can you turn that asset into something that scales? So now that the tax controversy lawyer had that asset that talked about the 7 things not to do if you get a letter from the IRS, what you should do, he packaged that up into a very short thought piece, and his PR team at his law firm was able to get him placement in dozens of business periodicals. Then once he was published, he could email the link with that article that provided an effective third-party endorsement to all those OMPs and say, hey, by the way, this published in your town, you might have seen it. And I've got a great continuing ed that I'd be willing to share with you and offer your entire office if it's of interest. Takes about 45 minutes. We can do it over lunch. It's a lot of fun. What do you think? Other ways that you can get credibility is you can turn your asset into something that you would speak at a conference. Maybe you can turn it into a podcast series. Maybe you can have a client alert on your own firm's website. Anything you can do to get your ideas out there at scale, and preferably to have a third party endorse its validity and that it's great, that can do a great job to get people's attention. Now, as you start executing a campaign like this, everybody's numbers are going to be different, but you're going to be able to start to predict your future success. For example, for every 10 outreaches you send, you get 7 positive responses within 2 weeks or something like that. You're going to get really high response rates. And after you've got those numbers nailed down, you have a little bit of history, you're going to be able to predict what your future success is because you're going to know how many outreaches you're going to make in the next week, how many of those are going to take the next step, and how many of those are going to convert to business. What most people do when they do that spammy version of outreach where they sort of trumpet their credentials and try to ask for a meeting, maybe you're going to get 2, 3%, some kind of response rate that's no fun and makes you want to quit. What's going to happen when you do it this way? You're going to get response rates of like 80, 90+%. Everybody's going to want to take you up on your offer because it's so valuable. For this particular client, after just a few months of doing this, getting so many referrals from these office managing partners, they actually had to shut off the campaign, go and hire a bunch of people, which is a great problem to have. When it was time, when they had the capacity and it's time to start up again, they just started running the play again. Again, it worked like a charm. So let's talk about the before and the after. In the before, you wait for the phone to ring. You wait for your partners to bring you in, waiting on things to come to you, and it's usually not the best opportunities. The after is so much demand. That's where you want to be because that lets you choose who you work for, what you work on, and where you steer your career. Okay, what I want to do next is give you 3 rapid fire examples. And by giving those to you, you're going to be able to find your way and find out what works with you. So here's the first one, and it's in insurance. A healthcare carrier, and a big one in the US, one of the largest, has trouble because they always have to go through intermediaries, brokers, or consultants to have access to their actual clients. So what we worked with them was to target the top organizations where they already had a little bit of work, but it was slice business. It was just a little bit what we offered as value or the piece that we offered on our dime. Sometimes that was an entire HR strategy. Sometimes it was a talent strategy. The insurance carrier would underwrite that. Using a third party was incredibly valuable because that might cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to that chief people officer. And then the distribution that they choose was, in this case, just to go direct. These were already organizations that they had some type of relationship with somebody in HR. They could just say, we can only do about 8 of these a year, which was true. That's what they had budget to do. Could you introduce us to the head of HR because we'd like to offer this to your organization? Before, this insurance carrier was on their back foot. They have to wait for an RFP. They have to go fight for business every year. The after was they get to shape the agenda. And they knew what that was because they were in the room when it happened. Here's a second rapid fire example. We worked with a consulting firm that wanted to drive business and create demand for large scale implementation projects that would help energy companies better utilize and handle and monitor all of their different aging assets that they have. First, you know the drill, target. Who are our highest priority organizations? Prioritization of all the big utility, all the big energy companies. And then what we did was we created an assessment tool, a database of how all the big energy companies are handling all of their various assets. That was gratis. That was on their dime. Hey, we can show you generally how people are handling all these aging assets. For a small fee, we can have you send over your data and we can benchmark you against the database. Well, once they had that, guess what it would show? Certain assets were aging and needed modification or help or some type of work needs to be figured out. And the distribution was pretty simple in this case because they have such great relationships at the top of the house of these various organizations that they would just go out and offer the gratis, the free part on their dime. Again, before and after. Before is they were running around talking about the huge multi-year projects. Nobody was buying because they just didn't see the need. By putting a small step in front of it and offering that, a free version and a slightly paid version, That's when they got traction, and the flow-through rate was very, very high for them. So here's a third example. Sometimes people can think, oh my gosh, I have this big, huge, perfect thing to run out to the marketplace. You actually don't. You can start with very minimal content and use the process itself to refine and elevate the value of that content over time. We worked with an investment banker that was just emerging to a point where he could start to grow his own business. Step one, we came up with who are the people that he wants to meet. And those were the CEOs of the people in that sector in that country. He did a decent amount of research, but realized instead of waiting until he had this 70-page PowerPoint with every single chart and graph and mind-blowing statistics and things like that, he just came up with a one-pager with 7 super interesting topics. He emailed them around. He asked for cold meetings. Here's the distribution. Step 3, he just literally went cold with folks. I'm coming to your country on these dates, gave a window, and said, I'd be happy to meet with you. As he started to have the different conversations, he started to hear from those CEOs what's on their mind. Well, the one-pager, after about 3 meetings, became about 7 or 8 PowerPoint slides. He had new material, and they were helping him develop it. By the time he got to about his 10th meeting, which is how many meetings he drummed up over a couple-week period, he actually had a 20 or 25-page PowerPoint deck that had the 7 topics still as the headline, but he had very specific, of course anonymized, but he had very specific information that each company was working on, what was important to them, where they were trying to drive value, what they were worried about. He had his thumb to the pulse of that particular sector in that country better than anybody. You don't have to have this big, huge, awesome, multi-million-dollar valuable thing to run around and connect with people. You can start with a minimum amount of research, ask for the meeting, and get several of these lined up in short succession. And by doing that, you can create the content you need and start these relationships off with a bang. With all of these stories, here is what you need to succeed. 1, figure out who you're for. Develop a target list. With that in mind, you move to step 2. How can you create some value? Sometimes it's big if you've already got some things sitting around or some things you can leverage or repurpose. Sometimes it's small. And then step 3, what's your distribution channel? How can you get your message of offering something of value to them in a way that they're going to pay attention to, that they're going to trust, and they're going to say yes to meeting with you? So if you like this idea of running a campaign or anything in this video, reach out to us. There's a link below. There's a QR code on the screen now. We have real human beings that watch these things, and someone will reach out to you and set up a call. Probably be Emma, could be somebody else on the team, but we love talking about these things and helping people be successful. And if you like this video, of course, like, subscribe, share it with somebody else. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching.